Rankin, director of the Walter Anderson Museum of Art, and I'm pleased today to be leading a conversation with Ed Croom, a photographer and retired ethnobotanist. And we're doing this in partnership with the Greenville Arts Council. Ed Croom's photography is now on view at the Malkin Gallary in Greenville at 323 Main Street. And Ed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Julian, how are you?
I'm doing well. And so I guess a good place to start, with a background in botany, we'll delve into that deeper, but how did you get interested in photography? Just what has your photo journey been?
So I really started doing photography when I was 19 years old, before I was a botanist. And at that age, learned how to do darkroom work and develop my film. And then at Chapel Hill as an undergraduate, I actually took a course in the physics of photography. But then I went to grad school later as a botanist. And as a botanist, you have to take pictures of plants, what's called their habit, which is what they look like, how they grow, and their habitat. And that's what I do now, is close up of the plant. And flowers are real important for identifying plants. So that's what I'm doing.
So how does your background in a field of science, and specifically botany, how do you think that's influenced the way you look at landscapes and look at plants? I know we'll talk a bit about how the land of Rowan Oak specifically is about the characters of Faulkner's Rowan Oak that people sometimes walk past without seeing them a little closer. So how does that science background influence the way you see the world and see plants?
I think when you've had courses in ecology and plant anatomy and plant morphology, which is the structure, ethnobotany, studied the uses of plants, so I'm interested in how they set in the landscape. And I think it informs how I look at them, and I look at them from different points of view that way.
So when you live near Rowan Oak, and so when you began this journey of photographing Faulkner's home, a landmark location there in Oxford, you began it and continued it over many years and more than a decade, and continuing even today. So give us a sense of the kind of changing landscape that you saw, and some of the images we can reference, the snow that so rarely comes to Oxford. You've got a beautiful snow scene there, and it has a magical quality to it. You focus on, the cedar guardian, as one of the images is called, the cedar guardian spirit. And it's a tree that's gnarled and has a character to it. And Rowan Oak, the home, is only a distant memory. So you've changed the focal point in that to the trees. Tell us a bit just about what that journey has been like, revisiting the same place and looking not at the home as much, but the landscape that surrounds it.
Sure. I think that what you do in photography is a lot of times like you visit a place again and again because it's not the same. Every time you go, it's different. So it's obvious when it's snow versus rain, but you watch over decades that change. This has been a steady project starting in 2003, so you can see we're going on a long time. And so that's the difference, is a place differently. And I think you see that that these photographs for me are a reflection more of your real study and love of a place, not just how many plant parts, or in a flower or something. You're trying to show people, hey, this is a great place, and a lot of people like Rowan Oak for various reasons. Many of them who have never read a word of Faulkner love to go there.
I think it's interesting, Rowan Oak specifically, and of course you photograph places that are not Rowan Oak, but this body of work that spawned the book is focused on this little postage stamp. And people that go to Rowan Oak, there is a ghost of Faulkner. I mean, Faulkner's long gone. He's not a living character there anymore, except in the memory of people. And the house stands as a bit of an analog of Faulkner himself. I think it's interesting when you think about plants as characters. in your work, because these things are still living and they are actually more alive and continuing to propagate and survive. So when you think about plants as characters, and I don't know that you think about it explicitly in that vein, but I think it's something to tease out, you know, what are those plants and trees and landscapes saying to you, especially at Roanoke, where they were alive, some of them, when Faulkner was there?
Yes, they are. And of course, most of the cedar trees were there long before Faulkner. The house and the landscape was first developed in the 1840s, probably. And so it has a history, right? And cedar trees live a fairly long time. And so the plants, to me, show they can kind of be a visual marker of a place for a long time. And I'm interested in this, how we as people relate to plants in the land. For most of us, plants seem kind of beautiful or peaceful. And Roanoke's a great place to me to just walk in the morning and relax. I'm there most of the time at daybreak, and I rarely see anybody there at that time. And so it's just a great way to relax. And so I'm showing where I have good memories.
Well, take us through not a full itemization, but the scientist in you, the botanist, you see a lot of different plants there, and the layperson, myself included, does not know enough about the native plants that surround us as we walk through the world. But what are some of the different kind of plants and trees and wildlife that you see at Roanoke that you've depicted in these photographs? I know there's the magnolias and live oaks and cedars, of course, but there's many other things too.
Well, okay, that's true. And even I see it different over time. The picture you talked about that I call like the cedar spirit, this wounded looking thing, and how it's healed itself over time. It's probably been hit by winds and broken limbs, and you become where it's a marker. And actually, I'd been there for a long time before I just got out one morning and I looked and the light just hit it, and I said, oh my gosh, these are just like ancient spirits, in the place. And people have related to plants, as symbolic things and leading you into mythology a long time. And so that's how I see that. I see that the cedars have their own stories with people. Some people say that the cedars were planted here because yellow fever was big, and that they were brought in because yellow fever wasn't found where cedar trees grew. Well, cedar trees, it turns out, is long before we knew what caused yellow fever, grow in drier ground, right? And we know that mosquitoes that spread yellow fever, just like malaria, like to have a little puddle of water somewhere. So it shows to me part of the history of the place. The plants I look at, and some of it's more the ethnobotany thing to say, when I show people the gardenias, a lot of times that picture on the gardenia, which is on the back cover and towards the back of the book, I'll say, what is this? And believe it or not, other people say, it's a magnolia. And it's like it's already planted in their mind that it's a magnolia. And I'm like, it's a beautiful flower. And to me, the picture we have in the book reminds me of just the light hit it right. It's almost like if you were in Asia, a lotus or something. There's something tranquil, and you can just look at it a long time. So the things for me is really, when I photographed Roanoke, I tried to turn off a lot of my analytical botanical mind. I said, I love this place, and I want people who come in either have already loved it or could love it to just show the spirit more of the place, the beauty, the essence of it, instead of all the technical details. But I see there plants that last a long time without a lot of care. Faulkner famously didn't like to work in the garden. He apparently still said, clean up this old raggedy looking part in the front that, looks so decayed and like we think of the South decay. And he said, only new money would ruin such a place, by cleaning it up. So they evoke stories. But let's face it, if you're a guy's tired and you don't want to do that, it's also a good reason to say, well, I don't want to mess with that. It's a great memory and a great history, but I don't have to worry about that. If you look at the land of Rowan Oak, you see that kind of when you walk into the left side, where the stables are and all that, that's kind of more Faulkner's things. This front part was a circular maze kind of garden from early, and a lot of trees had grown up, and that's what he was talking about there. He just let it kind of go semi-wild. But we remember that he also had about 30 acres of woodland, and he would ride his horse down there, or he'd walk around as part of the privacy he had. So that's what I like to say what it means for Faulkner, but what does it mean to so many people? I met so many people. They had a picnic there, or they had a great conversation there. There are a lot of memories at Rowan Oak. So I did this, and once the book came out, I found out even more. What did people think about it? They would say, one guy I'll never forget, you may have heard this story, but he said, I would come to my wife and she would have the book in the bed, and I would say, darling, let's talk a minute or something. And she said, oh, I'm just so happy looking at these pictures. We can talk another time. And so it's somehow, it's a tranquil thing that we've heard, and it's right here in Oxford. So part of my thing is I love plants, and you got to celebrate the plants around you. So a lot of these plants have lasted many years. So they're very hardy plants. Some of the plants have died there. There's a picture in the book of peach blossoms. But if you've ever grown fruit trees in the South with our moisture and our insects and our diseases, a lot of them have died by now. And the pear trees seem to be the hardiest with the least look. So I would call these some of our hardiest plants we have. So part of it turned it up. I like to document plants and where they are in the land. It documented the muscadine vines have died, and the scuppernong are the ones in the back there, and they're still alive. So it's, to me, a way nobody's systematically gone through and just photographed the place all the time. And so let me comment on, there's a photograph in the book I really like, and it's the magnolia, and it's dark, and it's been raining, and it's misty. And of course, as a photographer, you remember some of that. It was pouring down rain, and I stood under the little cover for your car to the side of the house until it stopped raining. The gutters were overflowing. The spouts were making rivers in the driveway. And when that stopped, I went out and took this picture. And magnolias are here since the time of the dinosaurs. And it just looked that kind of, the light hitting it, and it's real detailed, but the back is all misty of time. And magnolias are some of our oldest plants that have been here, like I said, since the time of the dinosaurs. And a lot of flowering plants have not been here that long. So it has that Faulkner-esque thing of reminding us that, the past and present are kind of linked, still in a living way. And so I like that about it. And as you said, what's funny to me, you never know what others say, but the snow picture that you mentioned, I went out, and the hardest thing about that is I had to be one of the first people there. I do remember that Ann Fisher-Worth and her husband was out there. They loved to go to Rowan Oak. And so I had to take a picture though, where nobody had walked yet. Now, I didn't want a bunch of footprints in the snow. And I waited for some amount of time, at least half an hour to an hour, for that sun to break through the clouds so it wasn't just gray. And so you can see in that picture, it's kind of coming from the backside. If you think about it, this is the working part of the farm. Because I see Faulkner had him a little mini homestead. A lot of people in Oxford did a long time ago. And in that picture, you actually have pecan trees, and you have a log building that was one of the first buildings there. Probably some of the slaves who helped build that house probably lived in that little tiny place. Faulkner kept his milk cow there and his horse there. Sometimes in that little place, because it was before the stable came, there might be two houses, horses, one for Jill and one for him, and a milk cow in there. And then the brick place, the red looking place, was hand fired brick on the place. So those are two of the original things that were built that, and again, probably slaves. The thought is recently by researchers there in the slavery project probably lived there while they were building some of this house. And yet we first were told, oh, it's a smokehouse or a storage house. Well, later it was. So buildings take different uses over time. And the house on the left was Mammy Callie's house, Caroline Barr, who, dedicated one of his books to, and was the black woman who actually raised him a lot. He loved her very much. So in the 40s, he built her that as a home, and then it's now like in a tenant house for other people like Andrew Price, who helped take care of the place. And so to me, sometimes if you come from the backside, kind of the help side, you'll see a whole different side of the world, right? And that's what you see there. The big house is way back up in there. So there's a lot that went into that. Shegog was the first guy who owned slaves and land, not there, but a little further out, that built this. So there's a lot sometimes in a good picture. You want me to ramble on, or you want to ask some more questions?
No, that's interesting. I think there were a lot of things that you touched on there, and coming from the Walter Anderson Museum, we obviously think about the land a lot too. And one of the paradigm shifts that Anderson thought about was looking from nature, not at nature. And I think some of that image that we've been discussing is redolent of that idea, where if you're looking from the backside of the property or looking from the laborer's side of things, then the history changes, and the meaning of what is there changes. But also I think as people who might visit Rowan Oak and see the house as this the central anchor, if you change that perspective and that focal point and look at it, in your case here, from the snowy sands footprint landscape, then you start to see perhaps from a little bit more objective perspective, and to let the other histories creep in. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know about the magnolias being as old as the dinosaurs. You always hear in the age of the dinosaurs, or as old as the dinosaurs. We should probably start saying, as old as magnolias, to think about how old they are.
Let me give you one other trivia about the magnolia blossoms. As a matter of fact, they're so old. There weren't any honeybees at that time when magnolias appeared. And so beetles were the actual original pollinators. We talk a lot about pollinators today. And it wasn't honeybees. So if you look at those flowers, a lot of times people are serious photographers even will show you all the little anthers laying in the flower. Well, that's because the bees do that, because the flowers weren't really very compatible to bees. So the bees have to cut all those anthers down to get in there and go for the nectar and things they want, and to get some of the pollen on them. So they learn to adapt to each other later. So I agree with you, and that's why I like Rowan Oak. I think it has the potential to be a great learning for nature and people and our history. And Faulkner, if I come to Faulkner until I started reading this, because a lot of people live in Oxford just say, oh, you can't understand Faulkner, he's so difficult to read. But so I came through him how he treated the land and what did it mean to him. And he knew plants and he knew animals, and he had screens on his house. There was no air conditioning in the entire house, not a single unit while Faulkner lived. But the day after his funeral, it was told that Estelle, of course, added one upstairs in her bedroom. He wanted to hear nature. He wanted to smell nature. So I think there's a connection there with your Walter Anderson. They both were a lot more connected to nature.
Yeah. Well, you can learn a lot by looking at the landscape that surrounds a place, and in this case, Rowan Oak. I think what was interesting, you were talking about this earlier with Faulkner's reticence to care too much, to manicure too much the property, and whether that was a function of he had other things to do, or he thought that, and it's probably a mix of both, that he also thought that these things should have their own life and should die and decay and grow beyond the confines of, kind of a hedgerow. I think it also is an easy metaphor to talk about his writing, which is layered and flowing and creeping like vines, and sometimes hard to get through. If some people certainly would say so, and I think that's a part of function of why it was so revolutionary too. It's this stream of consciousness. Well, the stream of consciousness of plant life is to let them grow and to let them flourish, and then to decay and to die or to persist. And so that's present in all of those, or in many of those trees and those photographs that you capture. When you think about the postage stamp, and people always want to look at Faulkner and talk about him, even to attribute quotes to him that he may or may not have said about, understanding Mississippi and as a way of understanding the world, which is not attributed to Faulkner, or at least the source cannot ever be located. So that's a bit of apocryphy. But thinking about that idea of knowing something intimately and then revealing something more universal, do you see anything, and you mentioned the flower, that sort of reminded you of a lotus flower? Plants have a way of speaking across time, and I think Faulkner's Rowan Oak and Faulkner's writing also have a way of opening up larger conversations, whether those are American conversations or just human conversations. Did you think about that much, or even either during the time of documenting these things, perhaps after, when the book came out, or just living so close to it? It's something in your backyard that you can walk right down the street and find, but do you also see it as a way to connect to other times and other places?
Yes, I do. But there's two stages. When I'm careful, when I photograph it, I treat it as a meditation. I clear my mind. I don't think. I don't go in with a purpose. I just say, what's here? What's here? And if you were a botanist studying a flora, that's what you would do too. You say, what's here? You don't go in with overly. But then when you look at it, you say, as an ethnobotanist especially, I've studied the historical and comparative uses of plants all over the world and through time. And that's what Faulkner does. Faulkner to me was like a folklorist documenting what people said and thought about their land. And he also was a great student of recording stories of what it was in the past. Let me take that to near where you live. So the live oak tree, remember he first did the palms and some work on the coast, and he loved live oaks. And so the picture I have is not a live oak. We don't have many live oaks in the county, but I want to switch to that to say it goes to your point that I had to go and live at the 12 Oaks Nature Preserve in Ocean Springs for 2 weeks to get that picture that has the live oaks, which is on the exhibit, it's not in the book, with the resurrection ferns fully green out. They don't last that green all the time. Now, why did I do that? Because I think that's their most beautiful time. It's after a rain, not immediately. Sometimes it takes a day or two for them to green up. And then they quickly dry up and they look brown. They don't look lush. And one reason I'm telling you that it took at least 10 days there until I could get the picture I wanted. And why did I do that? Because my favorite place, I've traveled in different places in the world, would probably be in the rainforest in Washington State and Oregon. And that tree now reminds me of those rainforest trees, all green and old since live oaks lived so long. And Faulkner liked live oaks too. So I include some pictures here in the exhibition to say, look at where you are and make those connections, right? Whether it's the the rainforest of the Northwest and what's going on there, because if you walk through there, you're just amazed at all the lushness. Or Faulkner being on the coast and starting some of his early writing there. And so, but ironically, I'm just saying you will see those connections the more you study plants. I want to mention one other one on the outside, and it's in Lafayette County, and that's the Yakima River picture that I show down there too. Famously, Yakima River's attributed to where As I Lay Dying probably was set for when you know, they were going through floods and losing wagons and trying to cross. It was probably the Yakima River is what most people think from what Faulkner said. So that's why I wanted to have this to say it's not at Rowan Oak. But, and to me, again, you can see that every story has a picture. So I'm going to indulge myself to say, so that picture, I went out on a Sunday morning and I said, oh, there'll be the least traffic. It's at the Dallas Jones Crossing Bridge, and there are a lot of people fish down there. And I said, Sunday morning, you have the least traffic. And I use a tripod most of the time. And so I had a tripod on that bridge. There were so many of those 3 axle trucks whizzing by me. And it felt really dangerous to have this very tranquil, beautiful. I went down by the river, but the view wasn't where it was like this. So I did both. So my point is, I just thought it was ironic that, you know, here's a story about people crossing this river and dying, and I'm on this bridge, and I'm like, these yahoos driving 90 miles an hour with this 3-axle trucks by me. It was a bit not tranquil, let me just say.
Well, I think that is an interesting juxtaposition, both in that story, but also more generally, is that the way we think about, and certainly when you're taking a picture, you can pose the frame however you'd like, and there's no sound that transmits itself through the picture. But while you're there, you know, it could be a wholly different world, and that the proximity of calmness and disruption of the modern world, that gap has become infinitesimally small in this modern age. And Walter Anderson, again, just to throw a little bit of my perspective in there, that was why he would go out to the Barrier Islands, is he wanted to escape this modern world. And I think even more so today, even when you do escape, that it's hard to fully remove yourself from the cacophony of the world around you. To talk about the Northwest rainforests, you know, there's people who try to find, you know, soundscapes which are 100% void of modernity, that don't have any airplanes in them. And there's guys who will search in the Pacific Northwest, and after years of finding it, maybe only find, you know, 90 seconds of silence until a plane flies over nearby. And I think that's important. It's not good or bad, but when people think about places like Rowan Oak, or places that I think we all can think of nearby, sometimes these preserved kind of windows into wilderness, or the places that transport us away from the stresses of modern life, they might just be right off the interpass, you know, the interstate or the underpass, and they might just be right through the woods. And I think that's in some ways a good thing for people, because you don't have to get up and leave your own postage stamp to find some of these places. It just takes a little bit of searching or going off the beaten path, and you can almost step through a portal to another time when maybe things were a little quieter or slower and simpler. And photography, of course, lends itself to that, because you can curate the frame and take it out of the context of whatever you were hearing behind you, or maybe the folks fishing that are just off frame, etc. And that leads me to this question. You know, there's a lot of images. You know, you take landscapes, but then you'll also change the focal point and be up close on plants, which I think reminds us of your botany training. So sometimes you want to look close, sometimes you want to look from afar. But in terms of feeling, the feelings that you hope your photography evokes, are there certain things that you want across the board for your work to say or feel like to people?
Yeah, I think you have to be in a relationship with the plant or the place. And that's why it's important to go back. And that's why when we look close, we feel more intimate, right? I'm staring you in the eye, I'm sitting next to you. I think that's an important part of any relationship. And then when I look at the landscape, I'm like, but it also matters where you are and what's going on, and can you love that sense of place. To me, really, my whole goal here is to say what you're talking about. You can love where you are and what's there, and this to me is a jewel. And when I started this project, one of my motivations was I was so tired of people just said, well, where's his typewriter? Or where did he write on the wall? And I'm like, he loved this whole historic landscape he kept from being turned into something else. And it's preserved for us. And he knew the plants, and he knew the birds, and he knew that sense of tranquility that he had a lot more tranquility, I'm sure, at Rowan Oak at the time he lived there than we do, because I have recorded sound and video there. And like you said, that's when you really know how much Oxford has traffic and construction sounds, and they go everywhere. And so, you know, it's Sunday mornings in general are the quietest time in this whole area, because otherwise, by 7 o'clock, there seemed to be an informal social kind of feeling. Well, then the noise can start, right? And so, yeah, you sense all of that. Thanks. I think for me, it is a little place of sanctuary, and a place a lot of people go to have a picnic, or, you know, just a little walk. And they may go here, they may go on the Bailey's Wood Trail, which some of the kids, I don't know how it was when, I know you grew up in Oxford, would call it Faulkner's Place a long time ago. And a lot of people defend it, no, it's Bailey's Woods, it's Bailey Woods. But I've heard kids sometimes just say, I'm going to Faulkner's Place, and they mean the woods. And there used to be springs there that kids would go and play in the wood holes of the muddy parts. And so there are many layers over time of what this place means to people. And as you said, it can connect you to other times and places. So for me, it's wonderful. When I started doing this book, I was actually doing research in China some of the years. And I'd go on a plane, including, and be gone for 2 weeks. And I would come back, and this would be my place to just walk and, you know, have some silence, and no worries, no project deadlines, no nothing, just celebrating a little bit of nature, even, you know, right amongst us.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's a good place to close out. I mean, this to use the oft used term, this postage stamp, this sanctuary, this place that you've found just as many others have found, and it's different to everyone who finds it. But this has been Ed Croom, a conversation. Again, I'm Julian Rankin, director of the Walter Anderson Museum of Art, and you can see Ed's work both in The Land of Rowan Oak, the book, and this conversation was held in conjunction with the exhibition at the Malkin Gallary in Greenville, Mississippi. And that exhibition is sponsored by the Greenville Arts Council and the Ike Trotter Agency and the Mississippi Arts Commission. So we encourage you to find that if the time allows, and of course pick up the book published by University Press of Mississippi. So thank you, Ed, for the time, and we look forward to hearing and seeing more from you soon.
Thank you very much for the interview, Julian. That was excellent. Thank you.